Okay, everybody, we're going to get going here. Thanks again for coming last week. For those who were on, it was really good to see everybody out. We're going to start picking through this one here. Same as last week. We're going to do questions at the end, and this will be recorded for PD points. So anybody that's in attendance, you will get your professional development points for this. So we will be tracking it. And yeah, like we said, we'll try to blast through the presentation and do a Q&A at the end. So tonight's presenter is Brian Keane. I've known Brian for almost 10 years now. I reached out to him, cold called him one time for some advice on YouTube, and he's been a great resource for me over the years. Studies, reads everything there is, and is usually one step ahead of where I am for sure, and leads me in the right direction. So real great resource. So Brian played. He's played USHL down in the States 05, 07, and that led to an NCAA Division I scholarship. So he played 4 years at UMass Amherst, and then shortly after that started Prodigy Hockey Development. So player development program in the Chicago area. Has some really high-end kids. Check out his website. He's got a list of a lot of the players he works with there. So some of the top players in the NHL that are in the Chicago area are his clients. And also now that's morphed into a role with the Chicago Blackhawks as a development consultant. So I'm going to hand it over to Brian. I think I shared co-host with you, Brian, so you should be able to share your screen and get going. And yeah, have at her. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Mike, for inviting me to come on. I'm excited to share some new ideas with everyone here. Let me share my screen. And for the purposes of time, I am going to skip through some of the slides so that we can discuss more at the end and have more of an open forum versus me just zipping through slides here. And my hope, let me see if I can get this to work. Cool. My objective with this presentation is to present some best practices in skill acquisition and funnel that into practice design. And I'm going to take you through a few different principles you apply in your own coaching. So, what's our objective? Our objective is to, when we're doing any sort of drilling, practice planning, anything on the ice with the player off the ice, how can we improve their performance and improve the adaptability of our athletes? So everything we're going to talk about is going to lead back to how can we help the players improve the quickest. What are skills? So if I was to, we can talk about this at the end, there'd probably be a number of different definitions of what skill is. And I think that's important, number one, for us to just kind of establish what that means. And starting with technique does not equal skill, in my opinion, and what most of the research and literature would tell you. So when we think about technique and skill, those are two different things. Technique being the physical expression of a movement, and skill being able to functionally apply that technique in a game moment. So one hockey example would be, I have great turns, and in a vacuum or in isolation, my technique is beautiful. I carry speed out of the turn. I'm very proficient, but skill would then be me being able to read that player on my hip and read that defender starting to try to poke check me, to then connect that read with the action. So the skill would be that read and feel for when to deploy the technique. So players with a high technical capacity, and we know a lot of them, and see it all the time, these players that are very good in practice or really good at isolated technical work, but then they have a hard time being able to apply it in context. And yours truly was one of those. I would fall into that category. I was very technical, but at the higher lels had a hard time being able to apply that technique in a functional and dynamic way to give me success at the collegiate level. So moving forward here. So all skill development, since our definition of skill, as we just touched on, needs to include some sort of problem solving. So if you're doing technical work in isolation, there's a time and place for that. But if we're doing skill development, there does need to be some sort of dynamic interaction with an opponent, with a situation. So there's some sort of decision making and problem solving. So the traditional approach, and this is the approach I used for a long time. And again, there's different ways to get to our outcomes and help players. And I'm not saying that this is the only way. This is just what research and a lot of the things I've dug into and studied point towards. So technique leading into the context. So or technique, working on technique, and then, trying to force it into a game moment. That was the traditional approach. And now it's more, turning it upside down on its head, presenting context. So presenting the game moment, and then creating game moments that, invite certain actions and present certain problems for the player to solve that then leads into certain technical expressions. So I think a good way to think about it, at least, I'm 34, so I'm sure there's a wide range of ages on this call. But I grew up playing street hockey in upstate New York, and a lot of the skill and technical things I learned were just playing pickup hockey. And I'm sure there's a bunch of you on this call that can attest to that. And you almost didn't realize how you learned the skills. That's because it was subconsciously you were learning it implicitly, excuse me. So over time, you just played enough and you started to solve game problems because you're in it, you were playing, and it was fun. And you do a lot of learning bottom up. It's not just top down, us talking to players and telling them exactly what to do. A lot of it's being in moments and starting to learn implicitly how we can solve things. But getting back to the slide, we need to, I think, good skill development. And again, linking back to, we're talking about skill acquisition, best practices and principles, kind of combining street hockey. So creating an environment that's, you can explore, you can fail as well. And then coming in as a coach and providing some purposeful constraints, which we'll get into shortly, to stimulate learning. So trying to mesh those two together to get a little bit more out of our practice design and skill sessions. So a question for you guys would be, in your eyes, what shapes decisions in a hockey game? So if I'm, coming up the ice with the puck, what are the things around me that are going to shape how I might solve that game moment? And again, we'll talk about this at the end as a group, but most of it's perceptual. Some of it's, visual, what you hear, what you see, feel. So if you aren't ever interacting with those things in practice or with your skill development sessions, it's really hard for things to transfer into games. So that game information, what we just, players, space, the blue line, red line, all these different variables on the ice, or it's going to regulate how you move, where you move, why you're moving, where you're moving. And that's that hockey sense and feel and reads in those game moments. So, trying to build our coaching arsenal, we want to start to become more of a environmental architect, designing information-rich environments or game moments to stimulate learning. So we want to try to become a little bit of Ted Lasso meets Frank Lloyd Wright. So we kind of touched on this a second, but how do we get skills to transfer? And what I'm going to take you through, we're going to fast forward through this, are 5 different tenets, principles of skill acquisition that you can apply to your practices, immediately. And again, I'm going to try to use funny pictures and analogies so it's chewable. But the first thing we're going to start with is aliveness versus rote repetition. So there's a time and place for both, but aliveness means, like, let's just say, being in a 5-on-5 game has a lot of aliveness. There's decisions to be made. There's traffic. There's pressure. There's all sorts of different things going on. Rote repetition would be, I'm just repeating the same thing in practice over and over again without any decisions. Everything's kind of laid out for me. So those are kind of two different ends of the spectrum. For skills to transfer, for us to get more out of our practices, we want to live in that alive end of the spectrum a little bit more. And there's a time and place to go to rote and to do things isolated, but we want to be able to have alive game problems for players to solve. So in that past slide, I go back, you had the jungle tiger and you had the zoo tiger on the right. I don't know if you guys in Canada had this this show that became popular, but anyways.
Oh yeah, it was here.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
But so you have the zoo and you have the jungle. So going back to aliveness versus rote, the jungle is very alive. A lot of problems to solve, a lot of different things going on that you have to engage with and overcome. The zoo tiger, it's a little bit more confined. You don't have to fight for your food. You don't have to, everything's kind of given to you. So figuring out on the spectrum where you need to live to, for the players to get more out of the sessions and to learn more. And the jungle tiger, if you think about both ends of the spectrum, is learning a lot more, a lot faster all the time. Even though they might have more failure, they might have more of an uphill battle a lot, but that is what we want a little bit for players as well. It's not going to be perfect practice all the time. So Keith David's here. He's one of the top guys in motor learning and skill acquisition. He's done a lot of research in this area. And what's something he brought up, which I thought was an important slide to add, was you can't adapt to an environment you don't inhabit. And the reason I put this slide in here, kind of linking back to our first principle of skill acquisition, that aliveness versus rote. If you've never been in it, in a situation where you have to deal with a switch or a double up that you're going to face in a game, or you've never, you don't play 5-on-5 hockey very often, then it's going to be pretty tough for you when you get into those moments, or more isolated, you're working on your cutbacks or you're shooting through traffic. If you don't do it very often under the same sort of pressures, then it's going to be hard for you to do in the game. So we got to figure out ways to present these situations to players in a meaningful way. So we're giving them a chance once they are, in a game moment, they have the confidence in the field for how to attack it. The next principle of fish tanking. So the practice environment, like we talked about earlier, we want it to have features or variables that the players will interact with in games. Those variables are what the players are going to build relationships with and lead to transfer. And linking back to our first example, so what I mean by a relationship is we had the player who was really good at escapes, turning, and then all of a sudden he had a opponent next to him and he didn't really feel out when to turn, or didn't have that relationship tight, didn't read it well, so the defensive player was able to steal it from him. So when we're working on those sort of game moments, we want the same features to be present. We want that defender there, and there'll be different variations of how hard the pressure is going, and if they have a stick, or if they have a stick turned over, or if they, you can manipulate it the way you need to so that the puck carrier has a high level, enough success. But we want those features, those variables to be present, that they're going to see in the game and interact with in the game, so they can build that tight relationship between what they see and that next action that they're going to take. Here's another slide. This is Sir Ken Robinson. And basically it talks about, linking back to that fish tank analogy, is we want to be like farmers. We need to create the conditions in which we want things to flourish. So if I'm fit, my fish tank, our practice, if I want to help players scan more, I'm going to give them a reason to have to scan more. If I want players to become better at making plays under pressure, I'm going to give them a time constraint to make those plays. Could be 1v1, could be 4v4, but we're going to build in rules and build in scenarios that are going to, push them to have to deal with those sort of different challenges. And again, I felt like that was a really good slide from the talent equations presentation he gave to USA Hockey a few years ago. Okay, the next principle, video game, and video games in general. Everyone, at least when I was growing up, sorry, I'm just going to move this quick here. When I was growing up, my parents would always be, get outside, go play. And I loved playing pickup hockey, all sports. So that wasn't a big deal for me. But, you look at it now, and some of these kids that were playing video games all day, they're making a lot of money, which led me to kind of think about, why are video games so attractive? And it was funny to go down into the research around learning, and some of the great things that video game designers are doing and how you can kind of link it back to practice design, skill acquisition, would be they build in autonomy, which, the player, so if you're playing whatever game, you're in control. You're the one driving it. You're making the decision on when you want to play, how far you want to go. Very important for development and skill acquisition. There's desirable difficulty built into games. So what that means is that like you get to level 1, then you move to level 2. Level 2 might be just a little bit past what you're capable of having success within. And that's, if it's way too hard, you're not going to try to engage with it. But if it's just a little bit outside your grasp, that's what they call desirable difficulty. And that's a really important thing for learning. And when we link it back to our practice design, we want to put players in positions where they're just a little bit past their abilities to have success. And the desirable difficulty challenge point is anywhere. And if you're 75% of the time you're succeeding, that's a pretty good range you want to be in. So again, going back to that escape example, if you're in that one-on-one and you're able to successfully get away from that player using escapes or climb into high ice 75% of the time, 25% of the time you failed. So that's a great opportunity for you to learn and talk with the coach, look at video in between and learn. And then you also feel good because you are having some success, and that's going to lead to good motivation and drive. You want to continue to work at it. So that desirable difficulty is built into video games, and is one of the reasons it's so appealing, along with autonomy, for adults, kids to want to engage with it. And when we talk about transfer of learning, this is kind of a little bit of a older slide, but when we look at this left axis, functional task difficulty, so how hard is your drill? How hard is the game you've designed? And then below here, how close is it to competition? Where we see the most transfer is when that task difficulty is fairly high, and where it reflects competition. So that area, if we're looking to design something that is going to help with transfer, that's where you want to try to live, in that area. And again, looking back at the video game analogy, it's if you are in that desirable difficulty area, and you're always going to be kind of pushing to that next level, and that's with some failure mixed in, and we got to be okay with that because that's part of the process for learning and growing. Okay, so we've talked about Joe Exotic and his zoo animals, zoo tigers in the jungle. We've talked about being able to utilize video game design to help improve our practice design and make it more enjoyable. And now we're going to dig into, when we're designing practice, how can we send invitations for action? And what I mean by that is, how can we design something that is going to allow for the players to see and interact with the game moment we want them to see? And part of that is having a clear goal of what we want them to see and what the game moment is that we're trying to help them become more familiar with and interact with. So we use the China buffet example. So, right now I could choose any one of these items to add to my plate, and all of it looks, quite delicious to me. If I wanted to start to shine a light on certain parts of this buffet, I would remove some of the options. So let's just say, again, trying to link it back always to the game. Let's say that we want players to read when to escape better in that one-on-one moment. Well, I might remove the option of space. I might reduce space. I might reduce time. And what I might do is implement a rule to solve this one-on-one. You get one escape. So the player, if they're going to have success, they're being forced to, by the game design and shining a light by removing certain options and removing certain things within that drill to really focus in on dealing with the problem in front of them. Another way you could really heighten and shine a light on certain parts of that learning inside that drill would be, you change the rules for the D. So if the D just gets a stick on that puck carrier stick, that's a turnover. So now that puck carrier is having to be extra aware of stick pressure, the body, and read, okay, when do I need to escape? And this is a process that will take time to become comfortable with, and you can scale this one-on-ones all the way to 5-on-5, but removing options, removing technical options, tactical, is then going to force players to have to problem solve different ways. And again, by understanding what game moment you want to have them interact with, it can be pretty powerful and fun for them too, because it's still a game, it's still interactive for them as well. But this example here of the buffet is just to give you that analogy of, if you remove certain options, you're forced to deal with these other ones and explore these other options. If you have everything at your disposal, you're just going to usually resort back to what's comfortable, right? So we want to try to help players explore different parts of their games, different techniques, tactics, and reads. We need to create games that invite other things and shine a light, and also remove the option for certain techniques and tactics.
Brian, do you got a live example or something you've used recently, just a drill, just to give us something that you've maybe a concept you've been trying to introduce, and just an example of the constraints you've put in?
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking about what we would do it. So those are the main things I wanted to share with you guys today. What I was thinking was we'd go into and maybe design a couple of things. If anyone had an example that they wanted to work on, we could kind of link into that. Do we have enough time for that?
Yeah, we should. Yeah, we'll get her at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So there's just one more principle here. My apologies. So, and again, these are all linking back to skill acquisition, best practices, what the research tells us is going to allow us to help players get the most out of their practices. Okay, so knowledge of versus knowledge in. So when we look at these two examples on the right, that would be an example of knowledge in. I'm the player, first person, I'm in that game moment, looking at it from that perspective, versus knowledge of, which would be from above, like you're watching the game, you're coaching it, you're two very different perspectives. So when we're thinking about designing drills, games for players, we want to be able to think about and have that first person perspective and that immersion in the game moment. So like we've talked about in the previous slides, they can build those relationships with those game variables, sticks, bodies, a 1-2-2 forecheck, 2-1-2 forecheck, starting to build that relationship and read and feel for those moments. And knowledge of is a great way to keep building knowledge about those situations. So maybe it's watching video, maybe it's you talking with your coach around different options you could have in some of those moments you were in. But if we really want to try to live as much in knowledge in that first person perspective, being immersed in the game moment, and then complement it with some knowledge of, which again would be video, would be chatting about it. And these are two different, like it states, two different types of knowledge. So when you stop playing, for me, especially when I stopped playing and I started to coach, and all of a sudden it was like, well, what drills did I used to do? Or did we used to do? And what, where do I begin with, trying to explain some of these concepts and things that are just easy for me? That's because I had a lot of knowledge in, but I didn't have necessarily a lot of knowledge of some of these topics and situations. So again, we want to stimulate players with a lot of knowledge and give them the chance to be in these situations as much as possible and work through it. And then obviously continue to build a lot of knowledge of as well. That concludes the main pillars here I wanted to share with you today. And I know it's quite a bit, so hopefully we can talk through some of this, but I want to try to give you some different things to think about when it comes to practice design and skill acquisition for the future. So Mike, I don't know if we have questions or how we want to structure moving forward.
Let's just dig right into it here. Thanks for sharing that. So I've got a question here from Elton. So kind of what we were talking about. If you're looking for an example of a skill to work on, I'd like to continue teaching the skill of gap control to my defense. So I know this one's a hot topic across the board in minor hockey. So have you ever went down that road and put some constraints in or worked on that one?
Yeah, for sure. So, thinking about the number of players, I can try to draw it up on, I think we have if I remember correctly, a whiteboard. So maybe this will help. So I guess my next question would be, is the focus the read of when to gap up, or is it inside the confrontation? What's the main focus point for that teaching?
Yeah, I can probably jump in here. I think I'm coaching U13 AA, and there's a big change in speed for some of these players. So probably, and the ability to shoot. So you got your D who aren't gapping up properly, backing in past the ring into the hash, and a good shooter's walking in and putting it over top of your goalie's shoulders. So we work on a variety of gap control drills, but I really try to struggle not getting into just a one-on-one or a two-on-one concept, and getting away from the technique, if we really want to talk about it, on how my players can judge their speed, and judge the speed of somebody coming, and things I can do to work on it. A little refresher would be, or just perspective would be great.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And definitely something at all levels should be working on and dealing with. I guess one place to start would just be, let's say it's our red line, blue line. And this is, again, we might want to, depending on the skill level and the experience, shrink the zone width-wise. But for now, we'll just give you kind of the immediate setup. So it could be as simple as offense, defense out, and the defensive team cannot pivot. So you remove they cannot back up, they can't pivot, they have to engage with the rush against, gapping up going forward. And Mike and I talked about this, there's a lot of different terms, but swinging in or surfing in, depending on how you describe it. But so let's just say here are the 2D. And again, this first one's not going to be too dynamic because it's just the starting point, but coach passes it. Okay, they got to swing in, and we give the offensive team maybe 8 seconds to try to score. Or if the D steals it, they send it up to the next two. And the forwards that had originally attacked, now you're on defense, and you have to sort where's the next line coming from. Oops, sorry, never used this before. You got to sort where that next line's coming from and re-gap and try to kill the play as quickly as possible. But you can't pivot. So again, it's going to be, let me erase this. This became a little bit too much. So you're creating that moment of, so you're the forward, you're attacking, the D steal it, they send it up to that next group. You have to then reorientate yourself and reestablish positioning. And if you want to make it easier on the D, have it be, don't make the zone, don't let them start the red line, the forward line, so they can get a lot of speed. That way you're going to condense the space a little bit, so the read gap is less, but you still have to make the read and get inside and gap up. But ultimately what this is going to do is, when you do defense, offense out, and it's continuous, you're going to have a lot of moments where it's like a game where it's not going to be just like you drew it up, and you got to solve it in that moment. And that's what we were talking about with some of those principles we just spent time on. We want them to have emergent decisions in those situations. And if they're failing every single time, then you got to reduce the complexity somehow. So one way to do it would be maybe it is one-on-one for a little bit. Maybe it is, then you go to 2v2 and 3v3. But you're trying to create that moment of transition where you were defending, now you're not, or you had the puck, now you're not, and you got to resort and try to manage the situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great. I immediately had a drill come to mind, but I hadn't put in the restriction of not being able to pivot. And I know for sure one D, man, that's all or nothing, right? And there's a lot of busts that result in a lot of 2-on-1s in my game. So I think starting with a 1-on-1 concept would be really great here, and just hammering it home and giving them opportunity to figure it out. I imagine your skilled forwards there might just wait to see when an opportunity opens up as well, so it can work both of them. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think that's what's nice about when you set up these types of situations, that you can work things offensively and defensively. So it's not just one or the other. But what's going to happen is the D are going to be put into situations where they got to make that decision. There's going to be some failure. They're going to have to adjust. But then they're going to, and again, you can shrink the zone. So again, there's less space width-wise, or you can shrink the zone so there's less space for them to have to re-gap up ice. And again, sometimes it'll be a little messy, but you got to let them work through it and continue to become more comfortable with those reads. And then you can add more and more players and complexity to it. But this is like a simple way to at least start to make those reads when you don't have, maybe you weren't on the heels of the play as a D getting up the ice and there's a transition moment, you got to figure it out.
Yeah, that's great. Anything for like stick on puck checking? Again, see it a lot. That's another hot button issue around here is players just being able to lead with the stick and go stick on puck, especially at the U15 level. Everybody's got it in the air. Have you done anything with that?
Oh yeah. Yep. It's going to sound kind of old school because it is, but it's a constraint. I will have D hold a tennis ball in their bottom hand. So they can't use their bottom hand. They can't go to, there's a time and place for a good cross check. But when we're talking about leading with our stick, dictating, it's one hand normally, and there are moments where you want to have two and you want to build a wall, and I'm aware of all of that. But giving them the constraint or holding a puck where you're just working on stick detail, it's amazing how they start to adapt their solutions so that they can solve it.
Yeah. And would you just throw that in any small area game, or do you have a specific one designed to use that in?
So there's one when we work on like rotations that I'll do a lot. So we'll just, pardon my drawing here is average at best. But the way we set this up, D1, or we can make that D2, D1, and there's a forward. So it's just a 2v2, and it'll start with a rim each time. And if the forwards change sides, this D can release, this D has to come into the net front area. 2D can't be on the same side at the same time. So and again, we add the constraint of you can only use one hand defending. And if they are starting to just connect it, we give them a ball and let them solve that way. But their goal, so like, let's just say the puck's down here and we erase this guy. So you have a forward 1 and 2. There's always going to be a 2-on-1 on each side, basically, unless the forwards don't want to create 2-on-1, which wouldn't make much sense. So we're trying to give the D a ton of opportunities to engage in, stick detail and pressuring and having to deal with a lot of different defensive reads. And the forwards get to work on creating 2-on-1s. But the goal, if we want them to get better at stick detail, is to put them in situations where they're forced to do it, and they have to do it a lot, and they're overloaded. And if you want to make this where it's just a 1v1, the forward gets the same constraint where they can only be in the middle axis, the spine of the rink. So the D get maybe a little bit more opportunity to pressure tighter and engage more in that one-on-one. But if you solve it, with two hands, it's an automatic, the offense team gets it back. So you're building in these like immediate feedback. If you go back to the old way you're doing it, or if we just have them have a ball, they just can't do it. If you steal it, you can drop the ball. And then like with all these, you're always trying to steal it and send it to somebody like it'd be in a game moment versus just you get a piece of it and it's done. You always have to win it. There might be but getting back to your question, it allows for a fluid, moment where you're engaging with a 1-on-1 or a 2v1. And again, you can only use one hand. You have to have good stick detail and push them up the wall and interact without having one of those solutions. So that's what we talk about with the buffet, right? So, one hand, 2, we're removing the 2, so you have to start to engage with 1.
Yeah.
This is out of your solution space right now. We know you can cross check. You're the biggest guy in the team. you're knocking people over all the time, but you never get a tick. So you're going to have to solve it. And you can do this with individually too. It doesn't have, like this game scenario setup I just showed, you could give different guys different things to focus on. It becomes a little bit, if you have 20 players on the ice, that's probably a little bit too much to have to manage. But if you have 8 to 10 and you have a couple coaches, just depends on your staff.
Yep, that's great. Perfect. We'll bounce around a little bit here. I'll just go to the chat box. So given the importance of perception and proper skill application, how do you measure true skill transfer in a game with your clients? Do you review video, talk with your clients after games, measure or link some sort of metric for that skill?
That's a great question. It's all through film. We figure out what needs to be worked on through film, through that analysis, and then use the film to try to create these scenarios and remove certain technical or tactical options to force them to work on some of these things that they aren't comfortable with. And then, are we seeing them utilize it in the game, and at what rate? Are they having success with it? Are they using it? Are they having success with it? For sure. That's the way I approach it.
Okay, one more here. Talked about aliveness versus rote reps. I coach a U11A team, and the skills are all over the board from kid to kid. So better to create alive drills or rote reps. Some more of the same technique over and over. So just touch on that one.
Yeah, I think that's another good question. If we just use that escape example, because that's just easy. If you're watching little Timmy, he's in that moment where he's reading the D really well. Like you can see his eyes he's interacting with the D in a way that is going to allow him to make good decisions. And when he escapes, he just still gets caught over and over again. Then for sure, you have this game going on down here. Let him rep it out in the neutral zone. No one should be hopefully in a youth practice, you have everyone moving as much as you can. So there are times that go to the board and there's times to look at video. But if there's a game going on and you're seeing it happening, have a coach take them or her and just go rep it. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think there's sometimes just too much of a reliance on just repping it out, and then the players don't have the context and the feel, like all the things we just talked about, for when do I use it? Why would I use this? Where do I use this? And they're not building that relationship with that opponent that we want. So to answer your question, I think it's definitely dependent upon the players in front of you, and there's times to lean on just repping it out. But I think that's something you can have a game going on, then you tell 2 or 3 guys, hey, like you need to become better at this. Let me show you and feel it out with me, become more competent with it, and just rep it out, get better at it. And then, but the real challenge is always going to be, like the feel for when to use it. So we want to just give them as much of those opportunities as possible. And over time, your team, the more you can have them interact with game moments and improve their perception and hockey sense, and all the technical stuff will catch up. And it might not happen immediately, but it will if they're into the game and you're giving them enough of that over time. But what happens is we over-index on that side. I think sometimes, at least I have in the past, and I think if I don't want to give like percentages, but I think we need to spend more time on those game moments and feeling it out, and then present some opportunities just to rep it out, right next to or close to when they just did it in the game or mini game.
Yeah. So, and I'm crazy about the scanning and vision and awareness stuff. So I've thrown spaghetti at the wall for the last 10 years on it and found some things that work and some things that don't work. What have your experiences been in regards to just helping players learn how to scan, whether it's rote reps or whether it's live drills?
Yeah, I think especially the younger, if we're talking like U10, U8, U11, U6, they need a reason to look. And this is something I learned from Ken Martell with USA Hockey. Um, congestion is going to lead to scanning. So if you're, let me just get rid of this. I do this. I'm sure there's a better way than what I'm doing right now, but bear with me.
No, it's fine.
So let's just say we want to work on pivots or turns. So if I'm working on turns over here, and someone's over here and over here and over here, there's no congestion. But if I have my whole team in this area, you're doing turns and you're also having to look. So it's very simple, but starting to get young players comfortable with congestion, and they are going to bump into each other, which is good, because that's going to teach them implicitly they got to start to look around. And then you can, again, knowledge in, knowledge of, one of the principles we talked about in the presentation, let them feel out and learn, like, oh yeah, oh, that guy's close to me, I got to be aware, feel out where people are relative to them. Those are really important skills that we don't talk about, and feel that we don't talk about. And I think a lot of us, at least where I grew up, I played football, I played all sorts of sports. You kind of get some of that in other sports. I think today, at least I would say in Chicago, I feel like we don't give players enough chance just to be in congested areas and work on very fundamental skills to force you to look around. A one-on-one retrieval, if someone's coming down on you and you're retrieving a puck, if you don't look, they're going to steal it. So if you make it into a game with young players, it's very, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. They're going to start to look out of necessity. It's not something you have to, and in those ages, and I'm sure some of you might have much more experience than I have with, I've coached at all those ages, but I'm sure there's people that have more experience than me. If you're just always telling them all the time, it's not it's not going to sink in maybe as much as if it's a game and there's something on the line, and if they don't do it, they lose. So you're creating scenarios where there is no choice. If they want to win it, they better be aware of what's around them, and it might take time, but that's some of the things I've seen, I've had success with personally and seen, and it's pretty cool to watch, because we're self-organizing. The players are starting to learn in those moments, because it reflects, maybe what they'll see at a higher level, and it's building good habits because they're having to deal with reading people and situations.
Yep, that's great. One more here coming in. Throughout the season, how do you manage and structure your season practice plans when it comes to alive versus rote reps?
So I, as a part of my role with the Hawks, I work for the AHL team, I work with the NHL players, and there's certainly times where when we're looking at a learning versus performance type of practice, there's definitely times where if it's a performance day and I want a high level, a high success level, well, it'll be more of a rote drilling. It's not going to be something where there's a lot of failure or where we're trying to overload them with something. And at the NHL, that's, there's a lot of that because there's not a lot of practice time. But when we're trying to learn something, or, put them in a situation where they have to interact with different pressure and different situations, that it just depends on the where we're at in the season, what's happening. But there's definitely a balance depending on what the week's looking like and where we're at.
Yep. We'll just give you one more here and then we'll let you go. I appreciate your time so far. Just something that you find with the pros you work with. Is there anything that have you found any magic out there, or are you working on fundamentals? Are you seeing deficiencies with those players that maybe the levels we're working with, we should put a little bit more time and effort into, just to have them, give them a fighting chance for if they ever get to that level?
Great question. I think the ability to, something that's really jumped out to me has been the players that can settle and catch pucks anywhere around their body. Because what that means is that you've anticipated the play really well, and you've been able to orientate your body in a way to settle a puck. So, and at the NHL level, you have to be able to settle pucks in one touch in a lot of situations. So I think anything you can do where you have to settle pucks and deal with pressure immediately, you have to read the flow of a play so that you're, let's just think of a scenario like a D to D at the point. So if the puck's down here and you're this D, and you think you're anticipating it's going up to your partner, right? You got to start to be positioning yourself to be ready to receive it while also reading the pressure here. So if this puck comes across, you're prepared for it and you can settle it and have your eyes available to read what's next. Or even beforehand, have a sense for what's ahead of you before you even touch the puck, obviously. Yeah. So I think anything you can do, if you can help players get better at using the heel of their stick to kill the spin and stop. And something I do a lot, even with pros in the summer, is I'll use lighter objects. And that's a constraint. That'd be a puck manipulation where the puck bounces more, it's harder to settle. And it's funny, like it works pretty well and it's fun.
What do you use?
I'll use one of those blue pucks.
Oh yeah.
Or a tennis ball. I'll use white pucks so that the player has to just read the body kinematics of the passer. Yep. So it's less about, and that's, again, all these things are going to happen on their own without you maybe having to dig into it this deep, but being able to receive a puck is a lot about reading the body language of the passer, right? So the more you can have the player focus in on that, if a puck is white, you're more worried about the body language versus just the puck, so to speak.
Yeah, it's crazy. Hey, so much of this presentation has gone right back to street hockey, trying to corral a tennis ball and the tag games, right? As a kid playing tag at the local rink, your vision and awareness. Right. So it's great that this stuff kind of comes full circle, and I know there's some it's a bit polarizing out there to run tag games. I've heard some parents, complain about not working on the breakout when you think of all the things that happen in a tag game for these younger players, right? So it's really interesting to just discuss this stuff and see how it all comes full circle. So we won't
Mike, if I could add one tag thing?
Yeah.
If you don't mind. So tag's like one of the best things you can do for a warm-up. And again, if you want to focus on turns, or you want to focus on inside edge, or if you want to focus on, evasive skating or defending, it's all can be built into that. And again, you want to lead to something where they're attacking a net and there's transition and direction, but it's a great way to work on your edges and turns and feel for pressure. Tag games are outstanding.
Yep, 100%. Okay, we'll wrap her up here. Thanks for your time, Brian, and everybody that's on. Check him out on Instagram, Prodigy Hockey. Great stuff on there. He's always posting lots of good books and articles and quotes that are right in line with this presentation tonight. That definitely get you thinking. So thanks everybody for coming on, and thank you, Brian. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having me. And if anyone has any questions, always feel free to reach out, email me, or find me on some of the social media outlets. So thanks again, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thank you.